What's going on YouTube? I'm AJ, and today we're going to do a gun review on what's one of the more exciting gun releases of 2025, Staccato's HD. Now, to be completely upfront with you guys, when Staccato released the HD earlier this year, I wasn't exactly excited about it. Reason being, as some of you may know, I do not like Glocks. So the idea of one of my favorite gun companies taking one of my favorite gun models and pairing it or making it anything Glock-esque was rather repulsive to me. And as I looked the gun over in pictures, some of the details, grip angle, little things looked a little bit off. I also had some reservations when they brought in a Series 80 style safety mechanism. Really just a lot of little nitpicking that gave me a lot of pause with the platform. But as I started to look into the gun a little bit more deeply and really understand what the primary function of the gun is, which is to collect law enforcement contracts and alleviate admin concerns, Staccato really took their time with this one and got a lot of things right, which we're going to kind of dive into both on the tabletop portion and in the final thoughts portion of this video. Now, I checked one out earlier this year at a vendor show, and I was pleasantly surprised overall with the gun. And then earlier this week, I got an opportunity to get both a 4-inch and a 4.5-inch in for testing, which of course I hopped on. And what I can say is the guns actually have exceeded my expectations. So to get straight to the point, the gun points like a 2011. It was very easy for me to transition back and forth between this and a Staccato P and XC that I brought out to test alongside the guns just to get a better feel and more honest representation of what I was working with. The trigger is not as nice as a traditional 2011, but still vastly superior to basically any service pistol out there. And in shooting it with my peers who are both left-handed and not as ingrained into 1911s and 2011s as someone like me, a lot of the ambidextrous features, as well as other features of the pistol, were very much appreciated by them. So without further ado, let's take it over to the tabletop, get a little closer look at what Staccato's presented us with the HD. All right, the Staccato HD. This version is the 4.5-inch with the sight block. I'll be the first to say, I don't like sight blocks. Just adding weight with no ports, no compensator. I get it's for racing. Maybe here it's for reliability, but to me, sight blocks are about as cool as restrictor plates in NASCAR. So, not a fan, but you can see rifling all the way through 4.5 inches. You'll also note on this HD line, you have the extra fluting similar to your CS. The guide rod assembly is a little bit different than what you're seeing on most Staccatos right now, so I will show you that before the end of this section. The slide portion of itself is going to be similar to the 4-inch. You have Staccato serrations, which, as I've mentioned several times before, I think are some of the best in the business. They have great bite, ton of traction. I think they're just phenomenal. The slide to frame fit is good, but not great. You have a little bit of side-to-side, almost up and down movement at the front. A little bit side-to-side at the back. So good, but not great. Finish, still DLC, which is one of the big perks to Staccato. They do a great job with it, and they do it in-house. On the HD, you have their new optic plate system. So you'll note, the plate itself is very thin. Part of this is achieved because the slide is wider than a traditional 2011. You have an iron forward that's placed far enough forward that you have clearance for the overhang of an SRO or a Trijicon HD. You'll notice the Trijicon HD sits very low on the slide. Honestly, excellent execution. I like the irons being in front of the optic. Just keeps them out of the way in function. I think this is a great job of execution. Plate design by Staccato. I noticed the hammer is a little bit bobbed. So the ignition seems to be a little bit different in design. There's a nice bevel on the firing pin stop, which makes the slide very smooth to rack. When I first held one, I was absolutely certain there was a Marvel disconnector cut present because of how smooth the slide action is. Turns out there's not, though they do have a little bevel on the front of the stripper rail, similar to what Atlas does. The frame design itself is a completely new design. So it's the same width as the slide, therefore wider than a traditional 2011. Mind you, this keeps this gun from fitting in 2011 designed holsters, but with an X300 on it, I was able to run it in my Filster floodlight with no issues. As with other Staccatos, you have a slight lightning cut in the middle of the rail. You also have multiple rail sections instead of just the set one. You have this cutout on the frame that they say can be used like a gas pedal. Personally, that's not where I put my thumbs, so I don't really use that, but it's there. The slide stop is where things really start to get exciting, especially if you're a lefty. So the design itself brings the paddle back quite a ways, which, again, not my favorite. I like it up here. But it was easy to activate, and it never got in my way while I was shooting. And, because it's ambidextrous, my left-handed friends did not have their usual reload problems that they generally have with 2011s. Overall, the piece is very well executed. Interestingly, it uses a spring as a tension point instead of the traditional plunger system. Moving back to the thumb safety, this was another area where I had some concern. The thumb safety itself sits a little bit lower in the hand than a traditional Staccato, like a Staccato P. Initially, this was a concern for me, but I actually found, because I like the Nighthawk thumb safeties the most, this is almost exactly the same position grip-wise as a Nighthawk thumb safety would be in my hand. So it actually worked very well for me. Tuning, as I expect with Staccato, is excellent. No wiggle in the thumb safety. Direct, perfectly weighted activation. You can see they put a lot of effort into the blending right here. Although I still occasionally hear people complain of kind of a hot spot right here. It might be a pinch too long, but overall very well done. My favorite change for the HD is you'll notice the grip safety is no longer here. Again, in my opinion, the grip safety did a lot to keep the 1911 relevant for so long because it was such an easily changeable part. But if doing a mostly ground up design, getting rid of it and just using the thumb safeties was absolutely the right call. It's fairly well blended, a bit of a hard line right here, but while I was shooting it, I did not experience any real hot spots. That takes us to the grip. So I had my concerns about the grip. As you can see, at least to my eye, the grip angle looks a little bit off. What that comes down to is actually the beaver tail is a little bit higher, as well as the point where your middle finger knuckle sits. So I can say, as a person who shoots a lot of 2011s and has to shoot a Glock occasionally, this gun actually does point like a true 2011. So that concern, fortunately, was alleviated. The grip texture is really good on this example. Also, one of my favorite things that they did with the HD is they elongated the trigger guard area, giving you more room for your finger to get in the trigger well. Now, they used a very rough looking polymer. I like how grippy it is. Makes for a very chunky trigger guard. It actually reminds me of a HK Mark 23. So I think that's pretty cool. This 4.5-inch example has their magwell. It's small. I think it's a good kind of duty use magwell. Overall, I think I would probably prefer something a little bit larger and just use longer magazines, but as an all-arounder to work with the 17 and 18 round Glock mags, they work just fine. For comparison, here's how it looks without the magwell. And then you get onto the mag release. Another thing Staccato did an excellent job with. You'll notice kind of the teardrop shape, reminiscent of Infinity's teardrop mag release, brings it back a little bit further, makes it a little bit easier to get to, and in activation it feels excellent. It's a very low profile design, so you don't have to worry about it getting caught up. and it's fully ambidextrous. It really nailed it with that. So then we get to the trigger. Now, unlike your traditional Staccato, this one actually has an aluminum trigger. It's fairly well fit, minimal up and down, very little side-to-side play. But you have to understand, it has a Series 80 type safety mechanism in it, and those Staccato will tell you it's just as good as the regular ones. It's not. So, what I noticed initially is the take-up weight is quite a bit heavier than you get on a traditional Staccato P. You come to a wall, but it's not as defined. It's kind of a spongy wall. And then it breaks through. This example is 3.5, maybe 4 pounds. The 4-inch example is a little bit heavier. The reset, quite a bit longer than you usually see on a 2011, and kind of a spongy rolling break. Don't get me wrong, it's a good trigger, especially considered to most service pistols. But compared to a proper 2011, this is a step down. That said, it kind of reminds me of the SIG triggers, the P365 and P320, where in dry fire they feel kind of meh, but once you're actually launching rounds through a gun and recoil comes into play, all these little nitpicking things kind of go away. So honestly, not a bad trigger, and I would be more than happy to use it in a duty capacity. So that is a Staccato HD. We'll go ahead and just crack this one open for you guys. You can see on the frame rails, they did it similar to the CS, where you have the little extra cut that they say is for retaining oil. See the little spring right there for the slide stop assembly? There's the recoil spring assembly. You have the plug right there. You have a shock buff, which really doesn't seem to affect anything in a negative manner, and it still maintains a full government length stroke, which I was happy to see. On the barrel itself, you can see the additional fluting, whether for oil retention, weight reduction, or just to look cool. It's there. And on the slide, you can see very exaggerated curve on the firing pin stop, which makes for the smooth racking, as well as a slight relief cut right there on the front of the stripper rail. Overall, very well done by Staccato.
But does it shoot? Quite well, especially in the 4.5 version. The 4-inch is fine, comparable to a 4.4-inch Staccato P, but the 4.5 is particularly smooth. Transitioned very well on the plate rack, and was very steady on the 5x50 drill. Both guns presented very naturally for me as a regular 2011 shooter, and though the trigger was a bit mushy in dry fire, I didn't find it holding me back at all during actual live fire. Overall, I walked away being very pleased with the shooting performance of both pistols. And in 4.5-inch form, the gun was quite fun on the plate rack.
All right, final thoughts on the HD. It's almost hard for me to say it, but I was actually pretty impressed with the HDs. It's interesting because the HD isn't really built for me, the enthusiast, but is built for me, the employee. As an enthusiast, it misses out on a few little things that you really get sorted out on the super high end side of the market with 2011s, the crazy slide and barrel fit, the amazing triggers, but it gets close enough while adding all the things that your traditional admin is going to complain about. Stuff that maybe the enthusiast isn't so worried about, drop safety, interchangeable magazines, ambi controls, reduced maintenance, but also opens up the platform a lot more for the general end user. Maybe somebody who enjoys shooting, but isn't really nitpicking all the details of these guns, like many of our men and women law enforcement. In shooting performance, I preferred the 4.5 by a fair margin over the 4-inch. It was smoother, less snappy, it tracked a lot better on the plate rack. Both guns did well, but I felt like the 4-inch was a little snappier than a 4.4-inch Staccato P, whereas the 4.5-inch split the difference between the P and an XC. Both guns were 100% reliable for me, save a couple lockback issues, and predominantly the lockback issues were occurring with the provided MechGar magazines. When I ran factory Glock magazines and even Magpul magazines, I had no malfunctions and 100% lockback. The usage of complete ambi controls, to include the slide stop and the mag release, were points that shifted one shooter that I let demo the gun away from moving to an M&P and is now looking at picking up one of these. And another shooter who was on the fence about it, big fan of the feel of a 2011, but didn't really want to deal with, $70 magazines and constant spring replacement, was blown away with this gun and I believe placed an order earlier today. So, though the HD is not necessarily an enthusiast special, it's absolutely doing what I believe Staccato intended this gun to do, which is open up the benefits of the 2011 platform to a wider audience. Is this the best 2011 I've ever shot? No, but this might be the most sensible 2011 I've ever shot for duty or contract purposes. And to that end, pretty high praise for Staccato. So, with that said, please like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you next time.